follow-on video to the previous one on the ideas of collective action, the challenges with collective action in terms of coordination costs and the free rider problem, and wanted to go through a couple of examples to how these ideas can be used to analyze the success or failure of social organization. And I think a great example of this is Occupy Wall Street. A lot of people very upset about what was done and not done about mortgage-backed security crisis, what bankers were allowed to get away with, really probably the largest scale theft in history. And a lot of people were made much, much worse off. And as far as I can tell, and a lot of analysts could tell, it amounted to absolutely nothing. There was no significant change, and certainly no significant change to the banking system. That will, yeah, that's done anything about the wealth inequality, that's done anything about derivatives markets to prevent that from happening again. No one was held accountable in a meaningful way. So it was really not, I don't think by any measure can you say that it was successful. So, but it was huge. There were, on the ground 50 to 100,000 people identified from the, 99%, which is a very large mass of people. And it's interesting to look at what their interests were, what they were trying to achieve. And in their manifesto, they have a variety of things they were trying to do. Houses were taken through foreclosure processes, which, is specific to what actually went on. And then you've got other stuff, they're poisoning the food supply, which, and the farming system is being consolidated to an unbelievable degree. There's very few organizations that own most of the production and processing capacity in a lot of the different subsectors of agriculture. Torture, confinement, and cruel treatment of animals. All of these things are legitimate grievances, but they don't have a lot in common, and there's many, many, many of them. And it gets to this question of like, how do we think about the costs and benefits of organizing and getting people to work together? And one of the things that was abundantly obvious with Occupy Wall Street was sort of like, okay, well, how do we prioritize these interests? Who's going to take priority in negotiating? It was loosely organized over Facebook and through message boards, but there was absolutely no thought given to like the inherent trade-offs that exist when you have a list of interests that long. Not everyone can get what they want. When there's a huge mass of people, there just has to be a structure where there's no mechanism for making trade-offs and setting priorities. And when that's true, groups that subgroups of this larger movement are just going to find that their needs are not being met, and so they're going to leave, and that just takes the energy out of the movement and nothing gets accomplished. So sort of this approach to like naive anarchy is there's really only two outcomes. One, it doesn't work, like in the case of Occupy Wall Street, or you are going to have an opportunist, usually some kind of demagogue, who's going to come in and take the energy of that movement and establish a dictatorship over the movement that they will use to navigate the voting system or the political structure of the day if you're not living in a democracy. But in terms of the actual interests of the groups and subgroups being met, it's just not going to happen. So just to reiterate, the more people and the greater inclusion you have, the more political power and leverage. But the more people and greater inclusion you have, the higher coordination costs you're going to have. And these coordination costs grow factorially in an unorganized mass. And so it's these costs very quickly outweigh the benefits as the group size grows if you're dealing with an effectively undifferentiated mass, sorry, I shouldn't say undifferentiated, but unorganized, unstructured in the way that Occupy Wall Street was. So it's just a really perfect example of these principles. You're also going to have, if you were to try and apply structure to this group, you're going to have groups that are not going to want to, it costs money to keep these things going. It takes an immense amount of time. And there will be groups, unless there's some kind of membership criteria and assignment of responsibilities and accountability, there are going to be groups that try and free ride on the larger structure. And so you'll see both of these things show up. One example of a very successful organizing effort was protection of the spotted owl. And in some sense, for the purposes of the effort, there was no diversity of ideas. There was no diversity of objectives. It was a very specific, clear threat, and it was localized in a specific geography, and the actions that they were looking for in order to try and save the species were very clear. So it was a well-organized effort, and it was highly hierarchical, with clearly defined roles and responsibilities. It doesn't have to be this way in terms of hierarchy, but you do need to have clearly defined roles and responsibilities and accountability. And as we go on, a look at different ways of structuring organizations in terms of roles and responsibility that don't necessarily look like a military style hierarchy. This makes me laugh, so I include it, but you'll sort of see biodiversity campaigns where it's not clear what it is they're trying to protect. It is not local. I mean, in this particular example, we've got some sea turtle and a caribou, and what they have in common, I'm not real sure. These sorts of campaigns tend to be poorly organized. They invite all comers without assigning responsibility, and I'm not really sure what the benefit is. They don't actually, in practice, attract more money. The really successful ones do focus on charismatic megafauna, but they tend to be like a recent one in Canada was protection of the sea wolves in the Great Bear Rainforest. Very charismatic and in a specific geography that was identified as a high value ecosystem, and so it's going to attract a lot of money and attention. This doesn't work, and it doesn't work politically either. It doesn't generate any leverage. All I can think is that someone is just trying to get attention for themselves, or it's kind of a way of collecting money from people without actually providing any benefit. But I think the comparison between the spotted owl and this sort of thing really makes it clear what sort of free riding looks like, and I think this is a form of free riding, and also sort of how to reduce coordination costs. One way of reducing coordination costs, and have a successful organizing effort. So just to summarize one more time, successful groups are going to find rules for communicating and decision making that solve the coordination problem and prevent free riding. And the remainder of the videos are going to look at characteristics of helpful rule sets and things that are good to avoid if you want to see your values expressed in the world when you're working as a group.